Thanks everyone for joining again. It's brilliant to see you all here. First, an apology. I really want to make these office hours, or we do as a technical author team, Canonical, more structured and come up with a proper kind of schedule that you can see in advance and have not just me talking. And we do have all of these plans to do this. This is really the end of the cycle for us at Canonical, and in fact, a lot of us are off for a sprint for the next 2 weeks, or for a week anyway. And we've got plans to talk about this and how we're going to structure the office hours. We're definitely going to keep it. We know that we asked for feedback last week. There's a forum post for that. So thank you for those of you who did leave comments. It's really valuable. People like us demonstrating stuff in these meetings, and maybe we can open it up to some of you as well. So we will. I feel like we can make these even better, as good as they are and as much as we enjoy them. So I just want to kind of say sorry and make my usual excuses for not doing a better job on that. Today I actually thought it might be useful. At the Ubuntu Summit in late last year, I did a talk that I kind of put together a little bit last minute, but it was really the distillation of my thoughts on documentation over the years that I've been doing it. And it was a kind of casual, light-hearted look at some of the things that I think about when I think about documentation. So I thought for this part of the office hours, the kind of demonstration part of the office hours, I would go through that talk. I would just go through the slides again and talk about it in a different way. This is a different environment to standing in front of people at a conference. And also to give everyone here an opportunity to ask questions if they want to on the things that I kind of bring up. It's not too formal, you'll see. I did it kind of almost on the flight over to the Ubuntu Summit. And interestingly, there's going to, I can't say that, can I? Hopefully there'll be an Ubuntu Summit this year. So I'll share my screen. I've got the slides open as a PDF. I'll put a link to the slides afterwards. There's also a video recording of the summit, but I'm hoping actually this will be a better recording of that. Window. Right, this is. So I called this presentation 9 Tips for Better Writing. I've been trying to write. I still don't consider myself a writer. Or a technical author, or somebody who's involved in documentation, even though my professional life has been doing those things for like 20 years. It's so difficult to kind of put a label on yourself. And I haven't got any answers. I'm still uncertain about things, and I think that's reflected a lot in the way that I approach writing. I will think that I found the answer to documenting something, like in the evening, I will go all at it and finish what I was trying to do. And I'll wake up in the morning and think it was written by somebody else and it doesn't make any sense. So all this has got to be taken with a pinch of salt, but they're the kind of ideas that I've settled on and the ways that I think about writing. It's called 9 Tips for Better Writing. And one of the things is it's more than 9 tips. And 9 is such a random number, and people always ask 9. There's no reason why it's 9. And I think what this is really about, and this is what the Academy is about as well, is to encourage people to start writing and start working on documentation. If it's anything you're at all interested in, you can do it. And you can read a lot about how to do it. You can read a lot of documentation. You can read books on how to do it. You can watch, videos like this, or recordings like this, or office hours like this. But you really just have to do it. And I think these are my terrible drawings that go along with this that I was doing at the same time. And it is a lot like riding a bike, I think, or doing any activity like snowboarding or something. You can spend hours watching the YouTube videos on how these things are done. Understand the theory even of how, if you look at YouTube videos of bicycles, they go on their own. You get them up to a certain speed, they just carry on. They're the kind of whatever effects are at play there, take the bike on its own. So it seems like you don't have to do anything, but really you have to get on and you have to ride the bike, or you have to do the snowboard, and you have to actually start writing. It's nothing to be scared of, and you just have to do it. And it's no different from the first days that I started writing to now, that it still doesn't come easily. It doesn't come easily for me anyway. And you make mistakes and you get feedback and you learn from that. And I still make mistakes and I still get a lot of feedback from the things that I write. And that's just an integral part of the process. But looking back, you can often personally feel like you've got better and you're proud of your personal development in this. I think the first thing that I was asked to write was 650 word review of a piece of software called PKZip, which is a proprietary zip unzipping application, and it was for Linux. So I was reviewing a piece of proprietary software that did something that open source software did and was installed even 20 years ago on the distributions of the day, Mandrake or whatever it happened to be. It took me all week. And if we were to find that review today, it would, I don't know, it would be painful to read it, because I know, I can remember the feeling now of just, people are going to read this. I was so intimidated by it, but basically it's getting started and doing something, and then you've got something to grow from. And I still very much feel that in the process, but you've got to start. So that's what this talk's really about, and that was the first slide there. This is number one, because for me, introspection and kind of thinking about things is the most important aspect of writing. Some people I know can just start, they see something and they start writing and they can fire out so many words, a day. And to me, it's not about that. I think if you ask any of the technical authors at Canonical, we don't spend that much time actually writing. I used to write far more words when I used to be a journalist. But a lot of what we do is about thinking about the problems and how to describe those problems and the solutions to those problems in ways that other people will understand. And a lot of that involves understanding it yourself and trying to understand it, because when you're a technical author, you're writing, you take for granted in documentation that somebody's already solved those problems for you and presented their idea of how things should be. But as a technical writer, that's your responsibility. You're given a product or a feature, and you have to think about how that works and how best to describe it. So a lot of what I do is playing with the software. We're lucky enough with open source to be able to install the software ourselves and use it and build things and break things. And that takes a lot of time. And you'll trying to find a way into solving those problems by thinking about it. And I think it's a later slide, actually, where I say take a break. But the answer doesn't often come to me when I'm doing those things. You have to do it and then go off and do something else. So the second slide is writing will be never finished. Even when something's published and it's printed and it's gone, it's never finished. You look back at it, like that first PKZip review of mine. There's a lot of things I would do now differently with that review. Well, I'd change it entirely. And I think this is true of absolutely everything that I write. And so I know that procrastination is often talked about today, and I think writers probably suffer from this more than most. But you do have to, like, this is a point where I need to commit this and send it off, or it becomes published. And the great thing about technology and technical writing and the stuff that we're all working on, and for a lot of projects, is that it's often published very quickly. So you may as well publish it. There's obviously a maintenance burden with publishing that you have to be aware of. So it can't just be anything. But if it adds utility to the product and does help in already making a start and solving those problems, then it's worthwhile. That drawing, it looks like a pea pod, but I think what I was trying to say was that ideas are often like vectors. Like if you're into old school arcade games, like games like Asteroids were displayed on a screen using lines. The cathode ray actually was drawn from one point to the next. It wasn't drawn in discrete pixels. And I often think of technical writing as I've written here rasterization, but it's the taking the perfect vector, the algorithm, if it was, and then kind of pixelating it for people to understand. And I can take that metaphor to all kinds of lengths. I mentioned anti-aliasing here. Anti-aliasing is kind of making the pixelation, hiding the pixelation by describing ideas around an idea, such as background material. And you can continue doing that. You'll never get back to the original idea, but you have to accept that you're never going to create the perfect vector through your writing, but you've got to paint the same picture. And in painting that picture, this is said, it's almost a cliche now in technical documentation, but it wasn't always the case. It wasn't always obvious that simplicity, keeping things simple, is often the way to go. And when technical documentation isn't simple, I think it often masks that the writer didn't really understand what they were trying to describe or document. A great piece of documentation is simple and anybody can understand it if they understand the context of what you're trying to do. But it's the hardest. It's pretty much the hardest thing to do. It's why tutorials are pretty much the hardest thing to write, because you take on all the burden of the assumptions that need to be made and you say this is what it needs to be. I made a bit of an obscure reference here to Glenn Gould, who was an amazing pianist. And he did two versions of Bach's Goldberg variations, one when he was young at 22 and another when he was much older at 48. And his virtuosity in playing was incredible. He was famous for this. And his performance as a 22-year-old, you can find it out. It's the one he's most famous for. If you know Bach, it's incredibly kind of algorithmic, polyrhythmic, and his finger dexterity is incredible. But much later, he did much slower and considered version of those Goldberg variations. And to a lot of people, me included, they're so much better. Time has gone by. He's slowed everything down. There's real intention behind everything he does. And I think about that in terms of documentation. It's so easy to show off your virtuosity through the language and the words that you use, or the constructs that you use, or to try and show how clever you might be in understanding this complicated technology. But none of that's going to help the reader. And so I'm always trying to think of keeping things simple for the reader, even if it makes you look like you don't necessarily know too much. I make the same point about Christopher Nolan's film Tenet, which I love. I love Christopher Nolan. Tenet's this movie that moves in two directions at the same time. It's incredibly clever, but really, I'm still undecided whether it's a good film because of its cleverness. I think he may have gone too far on the cleverness with that. So slide 4 is about the opposing pressures of adding words and removing them. I tried to show this on a sketch of a timeline. When the additive part is writing all the stuff, you initially go off at great lengths and develop documents quickly, and then you start editing your words, and there's the effort. I should have added to this, and I don't know where it would be, but the kind of final piece curve would probably be below the additive, because you really got to. Editing is more important than the adding at the end of the day. If everything has been said, then it's the editing that really makes the document sharp. But there's a trade-off in effort, once again, which is very connected to the procrastination and just getting stuff published. But it's good to be aware of it, that the editing is a really important part of it. And that is actually linked to the 5th slide of being forgetful. Maybe this is just me, but I feel I haven't got the greatest memory. And I think that really benefits me as a writer, because I can write that thing on the Tuesday evening and wake up on a Wednesday morning and think that somebody else has written it. So I look at it with a completely fresh pair of eyes, not necessarily remembering all of the struggles that I'd had with structuring things in a certain way and trying to keep things simple. And it immediately jumps out at you what the problems might be. And I find that's really helpful to be forgetful. I mentioned here the curse of knowledge, which is you don't know how much you know. You know, if you've been working on a product for a long time, such as Snapd, it's certain aspects of it have just become ingrained in me, and I forget that other people don't know that. And this is something that we're trying to do with the Documentation Academy, is, you know, break down that kind of curse of knowledge, and give everybody an opportunity to get on board at the beginning. And you need space to do that. So some people will step away from a document, feel like an hour or a day or even a week or longer, and then you go back to it with fresh eyes, just as you might review somebody else's documentation, but you're actually reviewing your own. So you can do it. It's difficult to review your own writing like immediately, but you can do it if you give yourself some space and come back, take a step back, as I write there. Another way to keep things interesting and to improve the quality of your work is to keep the variety there for yourself. In a typical day, I will work on 3 or 4 or 5 different things. I try to plan it so that I'm not context switching all of the time, but it's nice to work on some really complicated things and sort some more simple things, or things like the Documentation Academy to break the pace completely. And this makes it enjoyable. It makes it enjoyable for me, and also keeps you sharp on all of the bits of documentation that you're working on. And I put there that writing is creative. This is something I'd like to have a discussion about. I don't know if this is what other people think, but I really think that technical writing is creative. I feel I'm being creative when I'm documenting things. It's a little bit like programming, and I think I'd probably get to that on the next slide. Solving that problem that I was describing earlier of trying to understand some technical detail and then construct a way of describing it, I think is creative and technically challenging at the same time. And it feels great. People take it for granted. People don't even notice if you've done a good job. People don't even notice. In fact, they'll criticize something in the document that is not important at all, like the headings or the title or the category that it should be in, without realizing that the real magic hard work has already been done and is hidden there in the fact that they understand where this document should be, or that they don't even question it. That's the real challenge, and that's the creative part of this that I really enjoy. So ideas need a hook, and some technical documentation is very dry, and it has to be. I understand that, but I think we're all fortunate enough, and same with the Academy and many open source projects, in that you can be a bit more expressive. And by a hook, I mean you do something to keep the reader interested. I don't think a manual of the handbook of how to deal with certain aircraft emergencies is going to need a hook. You've got enough to keep you engaged with the writing, but our work isn't so critical in most cases, and so we can afford to add things to keep people interested, like a random idea or a creative word. And I think that really helps. You've got to use your common sense, but I wouldn't be afraid of ever using something creative, like sketches. I mean, they're silly, but they give you something to look at, even if I think that's supposed to be a virus. I can't even remember. It looks like it is a virus. So Docs code, this is an idea that comes up a lot, and I think Bill in this meeting actually talks about this. Maybe this is our background as well. I often think about, I was talking about the fact that ideas can be vectors. I also like to think about the fact that we're programming brains, but it's like a soft computer, but there isn't a known instruction set. In fact, everybody's brain instruction set is completely different, and that's what makes writing documentation so challenging, where we're writing the code to program other people with how something works, but we don't know the instructions that other people interpret. All we can do is make assumptions and try and understand them. And as technical authors, we are kind of the interface between the technical side, the engineers perhaps, or the architects, and how they think about their software and what they're doing, and how we think their work needs to be interpreted for people to understand what they're doing. And that's where Amina's Docs code. It also means how you structure and work on docs, which is another important aspect of it that perhaps we should revisit, because Canonical does both things. Some of our projects run as docs as code, and some of them are run as more like a wiki, if you look at the discourse forum posts that is used as documentation. So I think I've got a couple more, but writing as a position of privilege. I've got this infinity to one, and I've put that the writer is the colon. So the one being the product or the feature, and the infinity being all of the people that may read the things. I actually I had a meeting earlier on actually with somebody in this meeting. It was earlier on this morning, and their microphone wasn't working, and my microphone and my video was working, and so we tried to have the meeting. They were writing their replies to me and their comments, and I was talking, and I realized this is very much like this slide. I was in this uncomfortable position of privilege because I could respond so quickly and I could talk, and I feel this is, as writers, I mean the readers are in the position of the person without the microphone that works. They can't directly interact with us, but we can interact with the engineers and the people who've developed the software, and so we have a responsibility to those people whose microphones aren't working, and that's a position of privilege. I think we should always be thinking about that. I put here we have an obligation to ask the questions and answer the questions on other people's behalf, and we are the voice of the reader. This was a strange one. The words are a serial interface. I may have had a beer when I wrote this, but what I actually meant was that, probably like the coding idea and the vector idea that I realize now I keep revisiting, thoughts are parallel. They're multifaceted, and that's what makes them so difficult to pin down. A serial interface, if in old computer technology, I mean, it's still there in USB in a way, but a serial interface is basically one number after the next in a long line. So we have all of these thoughts and ideas and concepts bouncing around on our brains, and it's our job as technical authors to funnel that into a single line, and it's difficult. And I write here that first impressions count. So you need to do that in a way that doesn't discourage people and make them feel not part of the documentation set or the product that you're trying to describe. I think that's what I'm trying to get here, because it's another really difficult aspect of technical writing that nobody really talks about. And that's the point that I was trying to make. So the final slide was, and it was before we'd started the Open Documentation Academy, but it was to say, look, we're going to try and help give people the experience they need to get them the very first slide, start writing. And really that brings us back to the beginning and what we're trying to do here with the Documentation Academy. So that was my Ubuntu Summit talk. I'll stop. I'll stop it now. I'll stop sharing before I finish the recording, if anybody wants to ask a question and they're prepared to have their question on YouTube when I put the recording up, please go ahead and ask. But I'll also stop the recording and give anyone a chance to ask questions afterwards if they prefer.
Well, I'll jump in and amplify your point about docs as code. So I've done the work over the years to figure that out. So writing English is also like programming, except that there are 8 billion processor models you have to run on. There are 273,000 reserved words, and they're reserved in a way that vague words have precise meanings. For example, when your partner comes in and says, "Do you want to help me bring in the groceries?" answering that question honestly will not improve your relationship. So it's a language with vagueness, tremendous number of reserved words, many of which are duplicates or have nuanced, shaded, similar meanings, and everyone interprets them differently. So I would consider it to be a harder problem, which is why it's more of an art than what we would call the science of programming. So I don't know if that was a question or a comment, but just amplifying on your comment that I dived in there. Yeah.
What do you think about the idea of it being creative, Bill?
Well, it is creative because language has nuance, and language has different meanings to different people. So you have to do a couple of things that are not analytically possible in a mathematical sense. You have to feel the nuances of the words you choose, and you have to understand the general consensus of at least the region you're in, if not all of humanity, of how these words would drop across different people's minds and emotions and moods. So that's the creative part. That's the artistic part. And by creative, I think human creativity is about running a bunch of mathematical I won't go too crazy here, but I love the Marvel movie Doctor Strange because it's a wonderful character. And at one point along the way, he has to run 15 million simulations to find out if there's a way that everybody can win, that the heroes can win. That's kind of what we do on our creative side, but we don't have time to physically do that. So we let our brain jump through the neurons and disqualify and figure it out and give us these ideas. The more creative you are, the better you are at letting that part of your brain do that work, find those gaps, find those connections, and give you a list of candidate words and how to say them and how to use them and what comes next in this sentence. In a sense, we're almost like Chat GPT in that we're kind of predicting the next word, except that we're predicting the next stream of thought, stream of consciousness. So
Yeah.
it is programming, but it is an art form. I hope that answered your question and didn't just go crazy.
Yeah, no, I mean, you actually reminded me there's one of the slides I say take a break, and I've lost count of the times where I know other people have the same experience, but I really haven't been able to solve a documentation problem, or find a documentation approach, looking at it and trying to do what other people would consider real work, and I've just gone off for a walk, for a couple of hours, and I may not even be I won't be thinking about the problem itself, but the answer will come. You just need to give yourself that space and be kind to yourself, really.
And then you're a 45-minute walk from home and you didn't bring a pen and paper.
Thanks, Bill.
Sure.
Is there anyone else who wants to ask a question or comment on this? No worries, Jared. Thanks, Jared. In that case, I will stop the recording. And if anybody would like to ask a question without the threat of being on YouTube, then please feel most welcome.